from now on, at the beginning, instead of starting with the interview, we're going to start with group intros, because the hope is that next week when we go on side quests and we get more people in here, when we break out, some people may come listen to the interview, but others may just kind of go talk to each other, which is really what we want if they have something that they're after. So if it's cool with you guys, we'll go around the circle, just do a group interview. And by the way, the inspiration for this was like when I was going to a lot of meetups in San Francisco right after college, we would always start with a group intro, and it was really helpful for, if you came there with a specific objective. So I guess I'll start, and then we can go to the left with Jesse. So I'm Justin Harvey. I'm the CEO of Spatial Cinematics, which is the maker of Spatial Ape. And I guess the two things I'm looking for today are, one is product recommendations, to add to our roadmap, like what can we fix and improve in this space. And then number two is we are looking for basically a chief product designer. So if anyone knows anyone, we are really looking for that person and would love to be introduced. Jesse?
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Jesse. I currently have not worked really at all in the VR space, but just gave my 2 weeks notice this week to join Spatial Cinematics full time, which I'm very excited about. Been working with these guys over the past, say, 4 months or so, part-time, just when I have the opportunity to. But very excited to turn my full attention to this, and really going to be focused on growing, right now at least, focus on growing the Spatial Ape community and helping Justin kind of ideate on how we want to run the event and growing it into something that we all feel good about and can be helpful to developers and other people in the space.
Yeah, great.
Very cool. I guess I'll go next. I'm Tony.
Yep.
I co-founded Spatial Cinematics with Justin a few years ago, and I'm leading the product development of Spatial Ape. Looking for
Heck yeah, you are.
Sort of feedback to actually, make this thing an amazing product that keeps everyone coming back and hopefully continue to grow it.
Woodrow?
Is that me? Hey, I'm Woodrow, big VR enthusiast. I've been doing the media production for Spatial Ape, but I am now going to be working full-time with the Glimpse Group, a New York-based VR developer. I'm here just to learn about what's going on in the VR development community and connect with people.
Great.
Hey guys, my name's Robin. I make a VR piano app called Grand Reality, which is over there, the booth over there. And more recently, I'm also helping out with building this space with the Spatial Cinematics team. That's me.
All right, I'm Melle. I'm from the dev game Help Yourself. We are a bunch of students making this project during our master degree. I'm the 3D artist, so I'm not a programmer. So if you start talking about programming, I'm so, alright again. Okay. And I made the concept art for this world, and I think it's really beautiful and unique. And I like to go to this meeting here every Thursday because it's a nice thing to do every week. Because it's Thursday again, yeah, I can meet up with people and get information about VR, new things, and English is not my native language, but I try. I'm not good with languages.
Awesome.
But I like it here.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
great.
So, hi, my name is Michael. I'm the developer of VR Workout, so an open source fitness app in VR. And I also like to come here because I like to meet the people who are invested into VR and get news all the time, which I wouldn't otherwise do. And it's also my fixed point every week. And I like to talk about all kinds VR and crazy tech stuff.
Awesome. Maybe loop back around to Chris behind you.
Okay, you guys can hear me, I hope?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm Chris. I'm a developer. I'm working on AR apps like Cinograph AR, that is a previous app for film production and TV production, virtual studios in augmented reality. I'm also working on experiences in virtual reality for several years and in the broadcast industry.
Yeah, I'm Slapstick, or regular name is Marcel. So I'm a German guy, so also not a native English speaker in that regard. But yeah, I'm also kind of a Unity developer for VR, mostly not being in the industry yet, but hopefully going to that very soon. And yeah, I also like to be here with you every Thursday to hear your stories and also your experiences in publishing your app, or like also with how Spatial Ape is growing in that way. So yeah, I like to be here that way.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Helen. I'm from Canada. I'm a video games writer, but I'm also a narrative designer for virtual reality experiences. I'm part of something called the Immersive Theater Collective, and we're kind of trying to work towards our first virtual reality interactive theater performance. So I love storytelling and narrative in all its forms, and I think virtual reality is just the new frontier of that. And I like coming to Spatial Ape because I really like the community. You see the same faces all the time, and everyone's super engaged and super friendly. And I also learn a lot, so that's me.
Cool. Should I do me as well, or is that redundant?
Yes.
If we're going to do the interview?
Thomas is our special guest, so we'll let Thomas introduce himself and kind of segue
sure.
our chat.
Hey, Justin, we've got someone else over here if we want to. Jimmy,
yeah.
you
Oh,
want to
yeah.
introduce
Jimmy,
yourself?
you want to? We're doing kind of quick intros. Do you want to do a little bit of an introduction to yourself? If he can.
You might
Testing
be
1, 2, 3. How are you?
Oh,
guys
There we
doing?
go.
There you go.
There you are.
Yeah, great.
My name is Jimmy. I'm currently exploring transitioning into XR as a developer. I am not one myself, but I'm, putting together a project, and I find this to be a very useful environment of people and ideas that is the state of the art and cutting edge of what people are doing and who's doing it. So I like coming here and bigger and better every time.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Thanks.
Yeah, so shall I introduce myself, or?
Yeah, please.
So hey, my name is Thomas. I'm currently a game developer on a game called Cubism. But I've been working in VR for the last 5 to 6 years. And before games, I was actually working in enterprise apps, mainly for a startup called Inside VR, which is making software for architects and engineers. And yeah, like meetup groups and developer meetups and things like this were sort of the way that I learned how to develop VR in the first place. So I'm always really interested to see when these sort of communities sort of spring up, especially now in the last few years, well, the last year and a half, when it's been really hard to have these sort of meetups. It's really cool to see these sort of online communities become more active, and things like Spatial Ape sort of come up to sort of not just fill the void, but make something more interesting, where you get to meet other developers from other parts of the world. So it's definitely more interesting in a certain way. So I'm very glad to see Spatial Ape growing, and yeah, very glad to be here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, like I mentioned, we're trying to continue to mix it up to make this more interactive and engaging. And so I really encourage everyone to just raise their hand, speak up at any time if you have anything to say. And then on top of that, I'm also going to be just trying to really go out of my way to solicit feedback and questions after each of the topics that we kind of bring up.
Yeah.
So the first one that I wanted to ask you about is, it seems like there's this emerging sort of category of what I've heard described of as tabletop games, which is they're games that are either VR games or AR games, and they're generally played within, you know, the physical space that you could kind of imagine being on your living room table. They're usually seated. They're usually, you know, don't involve any kind of locomotion, and generally kind of narrowly contained into this sort of box. And I think for a lot of reasons, those games are starting to do really well. Like, they're relatively cheaper to produce because you don't have to create these huge, enormous worlds. They have a lot of promise in terms of being ported to future XR headsets. Like, they seem like they have a lot of staying power as the hardware evolves. I'm just wondering kind of generally what your thoughts are about the tabletop category. Do you see yourself as a tabletop game? And, you know, what's good and what do you like about that category?
That's a great question, and I think you sort of hit the nail on the head for a few reasons there. Like, especially them maybe being a bit smaller in scope and being easier to produce. Like, that for Cubism at least was a big part in the sort of the decision process to make this specific game. Because I'm a one-man team, and for a long time Cubism was sort of a hobby project and something that sort of happened on the weekends and in my spare time. So having something that was, you know, minimal and sort of tabletop, as you call it, really helped contain the scope and make it like feasible for me to work on something like that. So I think since a lot of the developers who are sort of exploring VR and making games and experiences are like a lot of indies, like I think it makes sense to have to sort of explore this space where you can work in a smaller scope but still make something really engaging and interesting. I think seated VR is also like underrated sometimes. Like, you know, when I first got in VR, of course, like the thing that I was interested in is like I want to move around. I want to have like a huge play area and a huge play space to like play Space Pirate Trainer in or things like this. But you know, you sort of get to appreciate how nice it is to sort of plop into the couch and just play a comfortable game and sort of relax at the end of the day. Like, there's a lot of value in those things as well, I think. So I think that's why these sort of games can maybe do well, because it's something comfortable and relaxing you can do at the end of the day and just, you know, sit down and enjoy some VR. And yeah, in terms of like bringing it to future headsets, it's of course pretty speculative, like what the types of input like these headsets will have in the future. But I imagine that a lot of those games would be easier to port, as long as they're more focused on sort of a gameplay that's in front of you and not as much on the environment. Then, you know, in theory, you should be able to like cancel out the environment and just have that in front of you in an AR headset and just play it in AR in the future.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Robin, I don't know, you know, piano training isn't necessarily a tabletop game, but I wonder if you see kind of some similarities with your own app in terms of being seated and kind of dealing with a very narrowly constrained play space.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people forget that motion sickness and things like that are still a huge problem in VR. So being sat down and not having to worry about moving around, not being having to worry about smashing your play space is a huge bonus.
Yeah, that's a great point. It will more quickly fall into the category of like comfortable games, right? So, yeah.
I'm sitting down right now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, no, I'm usually seated for these. Yeah, I mean, that's me standing.
Chris is standing, I think, but everybody else is.
Yeah, he's giving his heart some exercise, getting that circulation going. That's good. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, like, I think comes up a lot it's a common thing for I think apps that are successful in the Oculus Store, especially with indie teams, and that is having an art style that is economical to produce. And I was playing your game. I was playing Cubism again this morning, which I love the app, by the way. I always have. And I noticed, you know, your art style is extremely procedural. And now I also wonder if that's probably why you gave us images instead of kind of assets to host in here. Can you talk about the procedural art style? What are the benefits of it, and how did you develop that?
Yeah, sure. So the art style, like from the first prototype I made, the art style was very similar. The thing about Cubism is that it's sort of it's not procedural, like the levels are designed, but it's all sort of, they're all saved in data, right? Like a puzzle in the game is basically just a JSON file with a bunch of positions, and then from that file, the puzzle is generated at runtime. So basically these puzzles are just made up of a bunch of like small components, a bunch of little cubes. I think some of them are actually still the default Unity cubes, sort of worked into prefabs. shamefully, but it works. And yeah, so as you say, like if I would bring in like an asset of a puzzle or something, I would actually have to run the game and then find a way to like export an FBX or something from the puzzles like that. So the game is mostly data, which the benefit of that is that the install size is pretty small as well. It's like I think 100 megabytes, and that's mostly like music and like non-game assets like that. So yeah.
And is that an approach you would encourage other indie devs to take?
It totally depends on the game you're making, right? Like, it made sense for Cubism. I think it makes sense for probably for a lot of like small scale puzzle games like this, where you have like a very component based structure to your puzzles, where you just like repeat certain elements, and it maybe makes sense to just save these also in a data structure, like I did. But I imagine like a more traditional method makes sense for most games, right? It really depends on the game, I think.
Cool. What about maybe Mel or Michael? Mel, I mean, what kind of considerations or strategies have you taken to keep the cost of your art production down?
Oh, I'm so much struggling with it. It's really not funny anymore. So the thing is, I thought about making the watercolor analog textures tileable in Photoshop, so I can use it as a material in Substance Painter. So I don't need to manually put the textures in Photoshop in there. The second thing I thought about is the hatchings. They all have kind of a cartoony look on the curvatures of the meshes. I could try to make a curvature map in Substance Painter, use this as an input for a mask to have the catchings automatically generated. I still need to try this out. Right now I do everything by hand, and it costs a lot of hours just to make one texture.
Right. It does look good though.
Yeah, I hope so.
But that's cool, you're finding ways to make that process more efficient for yourself. Yeah.
Isn't there also also a cost in the resolution, in the polygon counts, in the amount of space you're taking up and performance that you're hitting by making certain decisions? And Cubism is an excellent project because you probably have experimented with different ways of creating the colors and the shapes and the load that generates on your users. From a refresh rate and things.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
Did you prototype that a lot?
So, no worries. Yeah, luckily, like, just the nature of the game makes it very simple for the Quest to run. It's, for a simple game, there's still some inefficiencies in there that I should definitely optimize, especially now that, like, the app supports 120 hertz, and it's sort of at the edge of what it can do performance-wise at this point. And there are certain design decisions in there that are still sort of hitting the game a little bit in terms of performance. Like there's a lot of transparency, which is not something you typically want to do in a Quest game. But yeah, just keeping the art style simple like this meant I had a lot of like headroom for some decisions which are maybe less performance. So it becomes more of a consideration when you're trying to make more realistic games or work with different art styles, I think. But I think choosing a very simple or even blocky art style like this from the get-go, it gives you a lot of headroom, in terms of performance.
What about you, Michael?
Well, if you know my game, then you know how I stand to art. Like a worm can fly or something like. I'm not sure what's. Yeah. No. I try to make the gameplay and the game mechanic as functional as possible, and art is definitely something that's far behind everything. So I'm not an artist. I mean, I can create some things, but it takes me forever. So my goal was always to make it bearable enough for people to play, and when some miracle happens and I have enough time or money to actually get artists, then I would add that later. But it's slowly getting better. So I mean, if I compared it to one of of the earlier versions, and it was really horrible. And now it's only bad. So that's definitely an improvement. I take my art from everywhere. So I for example, my skybox was some random nebula generator in JavaScript from the internet, and
Nice.
basically most of the stuff is generated somehow procedurally, and the only thing that's really added is my avatars, and those are from Sketchfab. So it's really finding stuff everywhere, and it's easier if you do it in open source, because mostly you can get away with it by crediting people and don't have to pay for it. But it would definitely be a point where I have to pay someone to make the art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've heard your music, Michael. You're definitely an artist.
Art isn't the point of the viewer, so
If it goes together well, then it works, right? But I think, like, I definitely have like constraints in terms of what I know how to do as well. I mean, big constraints. I'm not very good at doing good 3D arts or just art in general for games, and so choosing a style that can be done in blocks and stuff helps it be consistent very quickly, right? So I think sometimes like the decision you make in terms of the style, you can sort of design around your constraints as a creator to make something that still looks good. That was my approach here, at least.
Totally.
It's really
And I think,
beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you.
And I think that is somewhat relevant to Michael too, because Michael, your app doesn't really need rich artwork, right? Like what you have is perfect for fitness. It's more about flow state and that kind of thing. So makes total sense.
Well, Oculus might disagree at that point. So
Sure.
from what I've heard for now is that if you want to get it into actually in the store, then we have to be much more polished.
Right. But you don't need like a lot of like, well, I mean, look at Cubism, right? You don't need like really good assets or something for that. The decision to not have an environment and things like this in the game, a lot of that is also like, that's going to take a lot of work to make that look good, I think. Like just as easy, I can have no environment and try to make that look good and sort of minimal. And I guess I got away with it. I don't know, maybe it's getting away with murder a little bit, but...
I mean, this has the same aesthetics as the hand physics lab, which is basically doing something very similar, having a very clean environment, and I think it works really well with this type of game.
I think it makes sense for certain games where if you just want to focus on the gameplay, then abstracting all that sort of noise away, like it works a lot. And I think for fitness games or rhythm games, like that same principle can be applied for sure.
I think, too, going back to our previous conversation about potentially adding longevity for future hardware, especially hardware that's more augmented reality leaning. Anything with a white background is theoretically could be an AR app, right?
Right.
Which definitely
Why
has
would you need a black background and a white background?
Or either way, as long as there's nothing important in the background.
Yeah, exactly. So I was actually talking to one of the people on the North Star team, which is this this headset based on the Ultraleap sort of hand tracking controller, and it looks really interesting. Like since the first GIFs of this, where it really is like a promise of like a really good AR headset with like a good a decent field of view. And I haven't tried it yet, so I'm curious to see how well it works. But yeah, it'll be interesting to try to see if it can port Cubism for a headset like this, and to see how well it works or not.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be exciting because I actually haven't played your app with hand tracking. I've only done it with controllers, but I would imagine that the North Star is going to be even better than a Quest. So it's going to be interesting to see how that compares in terms of hand tracking.
Yeah, I'll have to see like how well the hand tracking is probably going to be more consistent, but. One thing I learned from bringing hand tracking to Cubism is that even if the hand tracking was perfect, it would still be really hard to design something that felt good for like 99% of the players, right? Like the thing with hands is that people approach simple interactions in so many different ways that it's really hard to like account for that well. And the benefit you have with VR and hand tracking is actually that you have this replacement hand that you can sort of mess around with a bit to partially compensate for the lack of haptics, right? Like you can have like in Cubism, the fingers sort of lock when you try to grab something. So most of the time it looks like you're actually grabbing it. Or the best example, of course, is Hand Physics Lab. Like they have the most advanced hands on the Quest right now, I think, where the hands always look like they're interacting correctly with the objects that you're interacting with. And to a degree, it does give you this placebo effect of like, okay, I'm grabbing this object. And I'm curious how it feels when you do it in actual AR, where it is your actual hands. And so not only do you not have haptics, you also have you have less visual feedback to play around with to sort of, communicate interactions. So you'll have to lean probably much heavier into audio and sort of signaling interaction cues on the object you're grabbing rather than your hands itself. So I'm very curious how that will feel,
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where all of us are still learning as things have gone along. I mean, when hand tracking first came out, I remember talking to Tony and we were like so excited about it, and we were trying it out on all these new apps. And then over time, getting a little bit more sober about kind of the limitations and restrictions of hand tracking. And I think now I'm kind of mentally at least swung back towards the other way, which is we have kind of a deep evolutionary drive to hold and use tools. And so I think maybe just using your raw hands is kind of leaving something on the table, but we don't know yet still.
Sure. I think it's, hand tracking feels like, it's been around since Leap Motion, right? So it's been around since the DK2 days, but it definitely still feels like we're having to learn what makes a good hand tracking app and sort of design around the core limitations. Kind of like when we started developing VR apps, right? Like everybody started with a roller coaster, but then like quickly we learned not to do that. Now, and Cubism is also guilty of this. Like we're designing hand tracking apps around grabbing things and releasing things, but maybe that's like just a really hard problem that we'll never be able to fully solve until we have some sort of haptic solution. So I'm very curious to see if there's going to be hand tracking apps designed around the limitations that exist now that design themselves around different affordances, right? Like poking or something, or gesture based or things like this. That will feel a lot better to like everybody who plays it rather than just a subsection of people who play it.
Sure, totally.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to add something to that before we jump into our last question?
Michael's got a bit of inside knowledge from Facebook about hand tracking. Are you willing to share?
Do you?
Well, it's no longer inside knowledge because since they already made the news public yesterday that the hand tracking has been considerably improved. I mean, you probably read it on the Hand Physics Lab is going to add the 60 Hertz mode. I already tried it, and it's really, it's really quite a difference. So if you have the headroom to for the performance, because you have to degrade the performance of the app, then the 60 Hertz hand tracking is completely different. So it doesn't look different, but from it in VR workout, it always feels like your hand is trailing behind your real hand, and now the game is getting harder because the limitations are gone. So it's really it feels like really your hand. So it's really snappier and it's also much more stable. So they did really a good job with the improvements, but I'm not sure how many games will actually be able to use it because it requires much more processing power.
I actually tried it this morning, and so at 120 hertz and like the high frequency hand tracking, then I'm sort of a bit over the limits already for me. So I actually had some issues like maintaining frame rate. So I think before being able to enable that, I'll have to do some performance improvements as well. And especially because from what I understand, you can't toggle it at real time in the same way that you can do the display frequency. So
that's something that's really bad, because you have to make an app that actually supports it. I mean, if you're running it on the Quest 1, then it's obviously still 30 Hz. But if you're running it on the Quest 2, if you have it in the manifest, then it will be 60 Hz, and you can't decide. And that's something that I think is really bad, because if you would have the ability to actually switch it on in scenes where it's not needed, you could make them more visually appealing, but use the simpler hand tracking, and then when you need the good hand tracking, you could switch it back up. But that's not possible.
I fully agree. Yeah, like at 90 hertz, it runs perfectly, but it's at 120 hertz, and I shipped that first, so it's sort of like too bad at this point. But I will try to do some optimization to try to get it in. But from what I understand, so the latency is mainly really good. So if you're moving your hands fast, like that's going to be tracking better.
So two things are better. It's tracking. It doesn't lose tracking so often. So I mean, I did this test where I was like trying to. Oh sorry.
You okay?
So I was like doing this where I was trying to wiggle my hand as fast as possible, like you do in the battle rope, if you have those. And before it was like the hands were all over the place because they were flying around and losing tracking all the time. And now it was really hard. I almost was not able to move my hands so fast that it loses tracking. I mean, I'm always playing with open palms, so I'm always helping the hand tracking a bit. But it's really much more stable. So it does, and it did also track it better when I had fists. And so it's really there is a lot of improvements.
In Grand Reality, we've had a couple of professional classical pianists try it out, and they've said that because in classical piano you have a lot of jumping around and a lot of octave changes, and a common complaint was the fact that the delay was more noticeable with the old hand tracking. So now I've also tried out the high frequency hand tracking in Grand Reality. I'm keen to give it back to them and see if that's improved it. I think it will have.
Nice. Oh yeah, I definitely want to try it out with one of these apps then to see how well the impact is. Like I think with Cubism the gameplay is pretty slow, so hopefully it's okay for it not to have this improvement just yet. But better tracking, more consistent tracking is definitely something that would help a lot, because especially like with Cubism you have to rotate your hands a lot when you're like grabbing pieces and placing it in the puzzle. And I know that certain positions the headset has some more difficulty, like keeping consistently tracking the pose of your hand. So if that's improved, then yeah, that would definitely be a benefit.
Cool. Yeah. Last question I was just gonna toss to you was just if you have any tips for marketing and for Oculus Store approval and that process.
Right. That's a tough one. It's because I'm not super good at marketing. I think I've been doing everything myself since throughout the whole development process and leading up to launch and afterwards. And I've made plenty of mistakes myself too, and sort of learned as I was doing. I think before like approval, putting your concept out there. If you haven't published the game before, like posting it to Twitter, posting it to Reddit, posting it to social media, so you can sort of gauge that there's interest in it and that there's an audience for it. Sort of going to events when we can go to events again and demoing your game and playtesting and stuff. Doing these things is probably more important to the approval process than like doing a lot of marketing, I think, just to show like Oculus that there's an audience for the game and that you've playtested it and that it works well for many different people. Their new App Labs is definitely a good avenue for that, and SideQuest is definitely a good avenue for that. If you can show like, hey, a bunch of people have played this and are enjoying it and leaving all these good reviews and are super engaged, then that's probably the best way to show that your app has potential. In terms of marketing, when like releasing the game, I don't know. I've been really bad at this. Like I've never really launched any ad campaigns or something like this. I've just been posting to Reddit and Twitter when our updates come out and hoping for the best. What I have learned is that like, in terms of impact for actual people like going to the game and like buying your game and actually like converting people to buying the game, the biggest impact is just visibility on the Quest store. So if you're able to do discounts and take part in holiday sales and things like this, that actually has way bigger impact than if YouTubers are playing your game or if you're doing like ads and stuff like this. I think that's just down to how big the market is at this point, and how many steps there are between seeing a game and then actually buying it. Like there's still a lot of friction there, so I think the biggest impact is still the store. So there's this weird you kind of need to reach out to your core audience and your players and stuff, but you also kind of need to market a little bit towards Oculus, and make sure that they sort of want to help support your game in the store. And they're super good at this. Like once you're accepted on the store, like every game on the store gets an account manager, and so they help you out like with communicating with different teams within Oculus, like the marketing team, the store team, and things like this. So yeah.
That's great. Anyone have any questions, like specifically around that?
I have a quick question, and it how you deal with tracking your customer feedback or response, like who likes what part of the game, which one you need. Certain puzzles get you know that people spend more time on them or come back to them more frequently. How do you manage that, and can you do that in app, or do you just like talk to customers on a Discord server or something?
That's a great question. So to put my answer in context, I started working on the game in 2017, so pre-COVID and all that stuff. So early playtesting, I did a lot during events and meetups. Meetups like this, but in real life, where I would just like bring early prototypes and playtest it. And doing that sort of playtesting is really good for like testing the first 5 minutes of your game, right? Like how well does onboarding work? How well are people like getting the core concepts and learning the mechanics? And I think doing that sort of testing helped me a lot to improve sort of the simplicity of the game and the simplicity of the controls. Like early prototypes of the game used almost every button on the controller, and some people really struggle with that. So just through playtesting with a lot of people and people at different experience levels with VR and games, I was able to see that was an issue, and then I basically changed the whole game to be able to be played with just the triggers, and so now people are able to like pick up the game and play it a lot easier, and that's all sort of down to doing a lot of playtesting and improving the game gradually. In terms of like the puzzles, I mainly learned how to do the difficulty curve for the different puzzles by doing a lot of analytics testing. So there was a demo out for the game early on, first on itch and Steam, and then on SideQuest as well. And in the lead up to launch, I did this sort of update where every day like a new puzzle would sort of appear in the game, and so people would play it, and I would get sort of anonymous stats on how long they took to solve it, what percentage of people would solve it and things like this. And so it wasn't perfect, obviously, but it gave me some metric to sort of rank puzzles from easy to difficult. But it was really necessary to do that because I kind of learned early on that I'm really bad at estimating how easy or difficult a puzzle is. Like if you design a puzzle yourself, you really don't know until you put it in like a bunch of people's hands. And some people will breeze through it, and some people will like spend a half an hour on a puzzle, So it's really important to just playtest with a lot of people, and doing that more data-driven really helped for this game, I think.
I'm curious if you have any information on the split, because your game, as we were talking about before, it could kind of work as like a real world, tabletop game, but it uses the sort of surreality of VR. Do you have any idea what the split is in your user base of how much of it is kind of the gamer crowd? I don't know how else to say it, and how much of it is like normal people who are kind of getting into VR. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because there's hardcore gamers that get a headset because they're like, I just want to, I don't know, jump off of buildings and stuff. But then there's people like my mom who plays Beat Saber just sort of for fun. Any idea how it kind of fits in there?
That's a great question. I wish I had those metrics. I mean, it's maybe one of those things where I wish I had those metrics, but maybe I shouldn't have those metrics. Like, it'd be kind of creepy if I could, like, dig into that, like, sort of data. But, yeah, so I don't really have that. But it does seem to be a game that sort of appeals to people outside of the typical gamer spectrum, let's see. But the evidence I have of that is more anecdotal. But I have been talking to one of the developers of Puzzling Places, which is a really great puzzle game that was on SideQuest and is also coming to the main store now. And they have this this Patreon set up, right, where people can sort of subscribe there and then get more puzzles, like either on a weekly or monthly basis. And this developer told me, like, because there's a bit more of a barrier to get that working. They were getting like quite a few support emails of moms and dads who weren't really that tech savvy but really wanted to play puzzles. So they seem to have a bit more data that sort of indicates that there are indeed like non-gamers that are really getting into sort of these more casual VR games. Yeah.
Yeah, I can also see, as it goes more and more mainstream, apps like yours that are more accessible and approachable, I think probably have a higher ceiling for growth. I mean, even if you just compare it to like the kinds of games that people play on the iPhone, especially in the early days, they're a lot like Cubism,
Yeah, I mean that's definitely my hope. It definitely was a goal of mine to make something that was hopefully accessible and could be played by like non-gamers. It could be a good like introduction into the medium, So I'm always very happy to hear when when somebody tells me that their parents are playing it, or their significant other that isn't necessarily that much into gaming, that it was sort of a gateway into getting into VR or into gaming. So hopefully that market just that segment just grows.
Yeah. Awesome.
When you made the game,
go ahead.
Did you intend it to be like a therapeutic game at all? I was talking to one of my friends the other day who has an Oculus, is definitely not a gamer at all, and I just asked him, like, if there's one game on the app or one game on the App Store that you could choose to play forever and you had to get rid of all the others, what would it be? And he picked Cubism because at the end of the day, he just loves putting on the headset, having like therapeutic music and just doing something with your hands. And he's like, it's a great way to clear your mind and wind down at the end of a workday. Did you intend it to be used in that way at all when you built it, or is that kind of something that's come about?
That's a very nice coincidence, but it makes me very happy to hear that quite a few people have said like, oh, this is like a really relaxing game. There's actually been like there's this study group that wants to do research on how VR can help with relaxation. And they actually want to work with Cubism as well to do like a test. So it's kind of interesting to see that people are like actively seeking out the game for this sort of use case. It's definitely a bit of a coincidence, I think. It wasn't too much intentional on my part. But I think the style of, I definitely wanted to make a game where you could just like hop in and do a quick puzzle. And I also very intentionally tried to keep like pressuring design elements out of it. Like I was considering, should I do like leaderboards or things like this, where you see how fast you design, like solve the puzzle and get a ranking and stuff like this. But I very consciously decided not to put those things in the game, just so you would not have pressure to like how quickly you'd have to solve a puzzle and things like this.
That's interesting. Yeah,
that's really cool.
The music is sort of a nice coincidence, I think. Like early on, I wasn't necessarily planning to have music in the game. I just had this sort of concept for the audio in the game, where basically it's all very piano based. Like if you play the game, like every puzzle basically plays a chord when you solve it, and basically every piece in the puzzle has a note associated to it. And then the sequence of puzzles basically is a sequence of chords, and it all forms like a song that you can listen to once you sort of complete the whole game. And that was basically the music. That was basically the whole audio design for the game, and I was just gonna call it a day with that. But just a few months before release, like maybe 4 months before, I thought like, okay, this is a silent game, and I can't ship this like this. And so that's where the idea of like bringing in classical music as like the soundtrack came in. One, because a lot of it is in the public domain, so it's easy to like use. But then two, because it sort of went pretty well with like the audio that was already in the game, I think. And so I hired this pianist, Salia Wong, and she recorded a bunch of tracks, mostly by Robert Schumann, which is like a lot of really relaxing piano tracks. And I think it complemented the game pretty well.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for coming in here and sharing with us. I feel like I learned a lot the last hour.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thank you so much for the invite.
Yeah, we need to add. We still need to add clapping. I don't